on YouTube. Well, I have no technical ability whatsoever, Mr. Mayor, but there's someone who can run these cameras, but the cameras are on.
Well, maybe we'll get a caller. We'll get a caller who can confirm that for us.
Well,
if you can identify the color of my shirt, then you know it's working.
Yeah, can you hear it? Yeah, okay. If they can identify the color of your shirt.
Yeah, they'll confirm. Yeah, the mayor's wearing a...
Don't say it.
Yeah.
So how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing really well.
All right,
I'm
great.
doing really well.
Great.
Things are good.
Great, yeah.
Great to be here. It's been a while since I've been on your program.
I know.
But now that you're regular.
I'm regular. I'm here every day. Well, Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. It beats driving to Boston, too, to do this.
Anything beats driving to Boston.
Anything beats driving to Boston. You're 100% right. Yeah. So I made a command decision. I just told the audience I'm not going to do calls this morning. You do a lot of that with Barry here on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
And so I just thought we'd talk back and forth. The biggest story right now, obviously, is the school shooting.
Right.
And so just your thoughts on a mayor of a city and how you guys protect the schools. Because one of the things I think that's been overlooked so far, maybe just because it's too soon, is that no one was there to protect those kids. How did that kid get in that school with a rifle?
Yeah, there are lots of questions like that, obviously. But, I think just for starters, you just have to say it's really hard to get your head around. And you just feel so terribly for obviously the victims and their families and all the kids in the school and the faculty. It's just awful, and all you can do is pray that they will be that the families will be able to cope. Right. I mean, I just saw on the TV last night a mother of one of the girls who was murdered, who was just she wasn't inconsolable, but she just sort of presented in the most compelling way the question, well, like, how does this happen, right? And that's what everybody's wondering. And you do wonder, for instance, how that kid got in the school, right? He is 19 years old, so he could pass for a student, right? It's not like he was 50
But he's carrying a rifle.
Yeah, so how does that
I
happen?
mean, you've used weapons like that. I've used them in the military, and you can't just conceal that thing.
No, you can't.
I mean, to me.
Right, but so that's I mean they had some there are high schools out around the country that don't have much of a police presence. Lots of them, like New Bedford High School has 3 police officers who are permanently stationed there, but not every high school has that. And in fact, most don't. And so there was a armed security guard who I guess I don't know whether he may have been on the other side of the school, but obviously wasn't enough of a presence. But they have to figure that detail out. But look, I mean, if these things can be pulled off with handguns as well. Let's just say if you walk in with a backpack with that has a few handguns and extra clips, you can reload, and there's an opportunity for that. So it's not just a matter of obviously there's a problem here with a kid walking in with a rifle, but it's to my mind. And I'll mention in a minute what we've done in New Bedford, but there were bigger policy issues here. So and what's frustrating is the debate shapes up the same way with every one of these shootings. Right. We had 17 kids yesterday killed in a Florida high school. If you remember back, 19 years ago with Columbine, there were 13 killed, and that was jarring as it should be. This time, it's like in some quarters it feels like, it's just another one of these things because they've become banal, they've become routine, which is
unbelievable.
Just an awful statement about our society. I think there are, the division in America really starts to take shape when you hear the debates around what to do. There has to be some. For me, it's the folks on the right have it correct that there have to be greater controls over folks with extreme mental illness, including involuntary confinement where necessary. I think the civil libertarians need to back off.
It would end the homeless problem in many ways, which I think we know is
many of those people. But not everybody's look. I mean, not everybody we're talking about a very small segment of the society, right?
Absolutely, right.
But on the other hand, I think the left has a right that there have to be additional measures to stop to inhibit the use of both assault rifles as well as mechanisms like bump stocks that turn them from semi-automatic to automatic is not a threat to gun ownership across the country. It's not an assault on the Second Amendment, right? So I think that's, but you have inflamed rhetoric on both sides, and the problem doesn't get addressed. So that's, to my mind, a bigger problem. What we do at the local level,
right, which is the most important thing,
is the most important thing. And in New Bedford, we've been very proactive about it. We haven't, if anything, we should be doing more is letting everybody know just how proactive we've been, because I think that's a deterrent in itself.
Yes.
But we have in our schools as well as in our city buildings, among city employees have done active shooter training over the last 2 or 3 years. That's been very useful, including in City Hall. We did it in City Hall last year, and it was actually very useful. The police department headed that up. And we learned a lot from that exercise as well. But in our schools, we do something which is called ALICE training. So that's an acronym, active something. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But it's it's training that's been done in our schools with feedback from staff, because the staff, everybody's thinking about these things. And if you're a teacher in a school, you probably are in the best position to recognize vulnerabilities.
Right.
So that's been done, and there have been upgrades in doors and windows and things like that. We do have a police presence at many of our schools, especially at the high school, which is obviously a large comprehensive high school. So there are 3 police officers there. We have them at middle schools, and then there is active attention paid to all of the elementary schools by the police department. We also have. We're also taking steps now to upgrade security in a number of places. I don't want to go into detail about that, but I'll say just in general, like for instance, this came up the other night in the city council, where what was before the city council was a ordinance motion to authorize the upgrades at the Carter Brooks School in the West End, and over the years those projects have just been about windows and doors and such. We've done a few of them. You've seen them around the city, and the schools look a lot better. But now we're actually building in security changes into those plans, so that you can't readily enter the school without going through the principal's office, without some heightened level of scrutiny. Right. So we don't have some crazy person walking in with a gun.
At least you can slow them down.
Right. So, and there are a number of other things that
probably best not to describe.
Right. Yeah. But the idea is it's unfortunate where we have to do it, but we've got to do it, and I think what we can do is just let more people know that we're doing it, and frankly in a slightly selfish way, which is if somebody's out there who's inclined to do what this kid did yesterday, they might think twice about New Bedford and go 100% somewhere else.
Right. That's when you go by Fairhaven as you came over the bridge. There's a cruiser parked in front of the school. Yeah. It used to make me step on the brakes for about the 3rd time when I realized there's no one in the cruiser.
Yeah. You just hit the gas.
Right. They're in the building. But you need, and the reason I brought something other than the obvious reasons is that politically speaking, there is not going to be any changes to gun control. It just isn't going to be. There never is after these shootings, so it's going to be talk about it, and it's not going to happen. And if you're in charge of a school system, if you're waiting for gun control to happen to save the kids in your school,
obviously can't.
You can't do it.
I mean, it's like everything. We don't wait for the federal government to act, right? If you do, you're foolish. Yeah.
Right. And I just today can think to myself that superintendent at that school must be. I know he's out there yelling for gun control, but literally, he should be looking in the mirror wondering. He had one cop for 3,000 kids.
Well, I saw an interview last night with the head football coach, and among the victims in the shooting were the school's athletic director as well as one of his assistant football coaches, and he described how he was in his office with a couple of college coaches and some of his players. They were doing a recruiting meeting. And they heard all this commotion. He locked them in. He ran out, and it all happened so fast. And he said, the thing was, this year in school, we did more training on this kind of thing than we've ever done before.
Really?
Right? We were as ready as we possibly could have been. And think about that, right? I mean, it's not, you got to do as much training as you can, but even all that training is not, might not be enough when everything's just happening in the blink of an eye.
Right. And it's very difficult to simulate combat. I mean,
the kids are in school. They're not training. They're not training for combat.
No,
that's right.
That's the thing. Like, how do you?
Yeah.
It's a very unfortunate, difficult situation. Hey, we'll take a quick break,
sure,
and then we'll be right back. Folks, stick around. We have Mayor Jon Mitchell here in the studio. And welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We have Mayor Jon Mitchell of New Bedford here in the studio with us. And yeah, I do think, just to finish up on the school issue, I think you guys do have your act together. And I think most of the area schools do. I know Fairhaven has police officers in there. And isn't that really what it's all about, anticipating this and trying to mitigate the risk?
So shows of force are important, right? Actually having force there is even more important.
Mm-hmm.
But also having, putting the training in place so people know what to do under the circumstances, because you don't have time to think, is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we do the training, and making the schools harder to get into by someone who's not welcome is also has to be part of the plan. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because people drop their kids off at school or send them on the school bus, like you do every day, and you think, hey, I want to make sure my kids are safe.
Yeah.
And today everyone's thinking of that.
Everybody, as you can't help it as a parent. I just watched that the mother I mentioned last just a moment ago, whose 14-year-old freshman daughter was murdered. I have a 14-year-old freshman daughter, right, at the high schools. It's like, it's hard for not to empathize at some level.
No, but it sounds to me like you folks have.
Yeah, look, we always get better. We're going to get better, but this is not something that's lost on New Bedford. Yeah.
No, that's good to hear. So, Mr. Mayor, we're talking off the air. There's an ongoing debate here about marijuana, and we've got some stuff going on in the city. And you just passed a moratorium on that with the city council, which I thought was interesting because they originally had rejected it.
Yeah.
The moratorium. What do you think changed their mind, other than your persuasion?
Yeah. Well, just so people are clear, the moratorium doesn't apply to the medical establishments, right? I think there's been a lot of misinformation out there. There are 2 medical marijuana establishments that are in the process of being licensed by the state for New Bedford. One is the so-called grow facility, right? The cultivation facility that's slated to go in the industrial park,
right?
And then there's the dispensary that is slated to go on Hathaway Road, right by Captain Frank's. And the moratorium doesn't affect them. The moratorium is also temporary, and I think what's different now is that the city council recognized that the state has not given cities and towns in Massachusetts enough time to come up with their own zoning and other regulations concerning recreational marijuana. So the state doesn't have regulations in place. A lot of time has passed. All this stuff's about to go live on April 1st, and yet here we are, February 16th, and the state still hasn't promulgated regulations. So neither we nor any other city or town in the state has enough time to come up with a sensible set of regulations that make sure that the retail establishments don't set up next door to a school or a church or some other sensitive site. And so what this moratorium does is it enables the city to hit the pause button. It's not permanent. It is temporary, and it gives us time to come up with a sensible set of regulations to make sure that everybody's interests are accounted for. Yeah,
I think that people who really are passionate about this need to understand that if it's not done correctly, you could have a tremendous backlash and see the legislature make some changes to the law.
Absolutely.
I mean, if it's not done right,
then
it's not in the interest of the people who are demanding that you do it immediately.
Yeah.
Which,
No, look. I mean, you have to. You have to look. There were a lot of folks who voted in favor of the referendum to legalize the use of marijuana, who would be the first to tell you, look, I may want to be able to smoke marijuana in my house, but I don't want a marijuana store right next door, right? So we have to reconcile all that, and we have to wait. We as a city have to wait for the state actually to figure out its business before we go forward, because if there's a conflict between local and state law is going to trump.
It's interesting because you have the mayor of Boston, the governor, the speaker of the House, just about everybody, all the district attorneys saying, let's slow this down. And then you have the Cannabis Control Commission, which seems like the Cannabis No Control Commission, just trying to jam this thing out there. They want to
as you and I have talked, I mean, there's some things in those proposed regulations that are, I don't know, they're
insane. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say that.
All
right. I mean, like the promotion of the retail outlets in densely populated urban neighborhoods. We've spent the last 30 or 40 years trying to remove the drug trade from depressed inner city neighborhoods. We as a country, and they are taking the opposite tact, which is to actually promote it. I don't think that's going to go very far, but it does give you pause about whether they are trying to move a little too quickly and without enough input from communities across the state.
Yeah, and it's gotten very little discussion except here and a little bit in other places, but that they're doing sort of an affirmative action program. People with previous drug convictions, or if you're the parents had a previous drug conviction, also you get some sort of a bonus for getting a license. And I noticed that Secretary of Public Safety Dan Bennett, I think his name is, he wrote a letter addressing that to the Cannabis Control Commission, saying, "What are you doing here?" I mean, I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
No, I think I know there are lots of people out there who really want to see this happen, but see retail establishments. But in the meantime, they can still smoke in their house, and they can, the medical dispensaries will be opened, and so it's not they're not going to be deprived of what they seek. But this is really it has everything to do with making sure that these things are established in the right way and that work and that they work for the communities that host them.
Right. For people who for some reason don't know, you of course previous to being the mayor worked as a U.S. attorney here in Massachusetts. We've seen the Cole memo's been ripped up by Sessions, and so that's putting enforcement back on the table for marijuana, which wasn't going on for about 7 years now. What are your thoughts on what the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Massachusetts will do, if you feel comfortable sharing that?
Well, I don't have any inside information on
right.
It, so,
no, I get that.
Yeah. So I can offer my opinion as well as anybody.
Right. But I mean, you have a unique perspective with the experience of having worked there.
I don't think it's so. I really doubt that it's going to be a priority. So Andy Lelling, the new U.S. Attorney, is a good friend of mine, and I can tell you that. He's not going. It's not going to be on the top of his list, but he's also not in a position to say, you know what, the Attorney General's all full of it. I'm not. I'm not going to follow his direct. He can't say that, right?
Right. Isn't it awkward that they're trying to get him to say that? And
it
seems like a weird demand.
It's unrealistic. Yeah, some members of the press have really put it on him, and so, look, he's. The U.S. attorneys around the country have to maintain some level of consistency with DOJ policy because, look, it's one federal government. You don't want to have the law enforced in Massachusetts in one way and in Hawaii in a different way, right? So, but in general, I don't think you're going to see some major crackdown. I think the biggest concern for people in the marijuana industry will be about whether the folks that finance these businesses are going to have second thoughts about doing so, right? Because, insofar as they're financing a drug retail, the narcotic, loosely speaking, retail operation, they are literally engaging in money laundering, as it's described in the U.S. Code. So, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's kind of a problem. Right?
Title 18, 1956, the general money laundering statute. That's it's something that I've used in the past. I've indicted people, I've prosecuted people for. I'm very familiar with it, and I got to tell you that the people who are the bankers, the private equity firms, and some of the others who are, lending to these establishments might wonder, well, do I take this risk? So that's where I think the discussion is going to be focused.
Yeah, it just seems to me, we talked about the era of this, Congress has to make a change to this, but I don't know that they will. But it seems that Dana Rohrabaugh from California, who's a Republican but more of a libertarian, has a bill where he says, look, federal law should just follow the guidance of the state in its jurisdiction. So if just leave it at that.
Well, that's also a hard thing to do, right? Because again, to the point I was making before, it's one federal government, and you can't say, well, we're going to treat something as illegal in Montana and as legal in,
that's an excellent point, of course.
Vermont, right? So it doesn't work that way.
So what is the answer?
I think what you're going to see is, as you see in so many other contexts, congressional inaction, and for a while until more states legalize, and then I think you're probably going to see legalization at the federal level.
Yeah, it's
going to be treated like alcohol, right? So the federal government more or less leaves, in the repeal of prohibition in the 30s, the federal government decided we're going to leave the regulation of alcohol to the states. You're probably going to see something like that with marijuana.
Oh, okay, all right. But it'll be interesting. I just think when these stores start to open up, if they ever start to open up, be interesting to see what the federal government does about it. Of course, they haven't done anything in Colorado yet, and that's a pretty much it's in your face type of operation out there.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, that's what everybody says. I haven't been to Colorado since it was legalized, so I don't know. But But yeah, I think some of the more interesting questions are going to be around on-site use, and that's something that's being taken up at the state level right now. It's not if you have a bar that sells marijuana and people ingest it and are unable, too impaired to drive. Right. There isn't a breathalyzer for marijuana. Right. And so, like, how do you know if someone's over the limit? That's a problem that it will have to be sorted out.
Yeah. And
that's one of many.
It's one of many. Yeah. And we're in a brave new world. So I know you've been very actively involved, obviously, in the city finances, and you're trying to do some things here to control spending. And you've used the term, and I don't find you to be a person of exaggeration, that quite frankly, it's unsustainable, some of the costs that are built into the budget here. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, it's New Bedford has, over the last few years, as we know, has been experiencing a good deal of growth. The job growth has been as significant as it's been in well over a generation, which is great. We want to keep that going. But what hasn't followed from that is a real uptick, a sharp uptick in tax revenues, and there are lots of reasons for that. Revenue has been growing at about 2% a year, and we have, as a city government, certain major costs that have been growing far faster than that. So healthcare has been growing really fast, at 9% last year, right? So very, very high. Pension costs have been growing, and those will continue to grow over the next few years at a rate that's faster than inflation. Same thing with charter school obligations. Those are really the big three that are really crowding us out, and they all have one thing in common, which is they are in varying degrees state mandates, right? So there isn't much that the city can do to say, you know what, we're not going to follow state pension law here. That's just not an option. Same thing with healthcare. We just have very little room to maneuver there. And charter schools are specifically a state mandate. A school charter is issued by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and a municipality is required to pay for the students who go to that charter school. So, so in this time of growth, it's clear that we're going to have to continue to find ways to expand the tax base, and that's why we've talked about the development of the municipal golf course, because there's an opportunity there to expand the commercial base, and there really isn't any other spot like that in the city, because the city of New Bedford is geographically small and largely built out. So, and we rely on property taxes, obviously. So that's, and there are a lot of other smaller city properties that we want to throw in the mix, but altogether that's not going to do the trick. We've got to get our arms around things like, particularly healthcare costs. We have to do everything we can to fight off more charter schools, and that's not to say that I don't have an absolute opposite. I don't oppose charter schools absolutely. I just think that there's a place for them, but we can't afford them, So when it comes to healthcare, most of the municipalities in the state have adopted a state law that we refer to as Section 21 of the Municipal Healthcare Reform Act of 2010 that allows a city to go to a city or the unions to go to an arbitrator if they can't agree on the costs of the terms of their healthcare plans, right? So we negotiate as we do for wages and other things that affect the working conditions of our employees. We negotiate over the terms of their health care, and we pay 75% of the health care premiums, right? So the city pays 75%. Not every community pays 75%. So like here in Fairhaven, I think it's someone will call. Well,
someone will text me.
Someone text you.
But
I think it's 60. It's in Dartmouth. It's 50.
Lakeville's 50.
Yeah. So because we pay the majority of the premiums, we suck up 3/4 of the cost increases. So it's easier for the union to say, you know what, we'll just pay higher premiums rather than to adjust the terms of the benefits, right? In other words, we're willing to continue to the position of the unions, and look, everybody deserves good health care coverage, and I'm not saying anything different from that. But it is because of that split, it's easier for them to say, yeah, I know the cost of these things are going up, but because you're paying 3/4 of it, city government, we're okay with it.
Right.
So they can say no, and we don't have recourse.
Fairhaven's 60%.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. So in any case, we've been pursuing the adoption of municipal health care reform so that the city, or even the unions have the same ability to go to an arbitrator and say, you know what, can decide this for us.
Okay.
So that's what we've been talking about. The city council has taken that up. It has deferred action on it for 90 days, so it'll be taken up again in April, just as we're about to launch the budget discussion. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that in earnest today. But we don't want. I mean, understand there are some real pressures here, right? So, taxes have gone up too much in the city, I believe, and it's been of necessity because of these real strong cost pressures, especially pensions and healthcare.
Right.
That's not sustainable because for two major reasons. One, it's an imposition on residents, right?
Yes.
So especially some of the elderly in our city who live on fixed incomes and whose tax bills, and whose homes are their most important asset. And we don't want the taxes to be such in the city that they're driven out of their homes. That's a real risk. And then on the commercial side, it's not good for New Bedford to have a high tax rate.
No,
it's a commercial tax rate. It's not good. No. We need to compete.
Right.
So you have that. There's also a need for the city to invest back in itself. So we've had a discussion this week in the city council about the kinds of things that we need to do to continue to build our city. So road work, right? That's we have issues with lots of years and years of deferred maintenance of the roadways in the city. That's all catching up to us now. Right. And as you can see from the potholes and everything else, so we've got to invest in that. We've got to invest in schools, right? We have to invest in that. So that was part of the plan. We have to invest in even things like, the elevator in City Hall, right? So, we've got the oldest operating elevator in the United States.
Really?
In Bedford City Hall. Yeah, that cage.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the oldest operating elevator in the United States. And it's really cool, right? It is a conversation piece. But because it's older than all the other ones, there really aren't too many parts out there to replace the ones when they fail. I hadn't
thought about that. Right, so of course.
It's stuff like that. You have to continue.
And what's an elevator cost? I mean, got to be a lot of money, right?
The elevators cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're expensive. Elevators are expensive.
Elevators are expensive.
So I mean, it's things like that, and there are plenty of other examples. Our library system, right? You have to if you're going to have a library system, you can't have like 40-year-old rugs sitting in it, right? So so the city has to invest back in itself, and that's really important. So they have all these cost pressures, which add up to a real challenge, and we don't want to be a city that is constrained by the growth of these entitlement programs, and not be able to reinvest, not be able to lighten the load on taxpayers. So those are the challenges that we're facing.
When we come back, I want to go into that a little bit more. We're going to take a very quick break because this is not unique to New Bedford. I mean, you look at Hartford, Connecticut's going.
Well, there you go.
Going to go out of. I mean, if you read the New York Times,
the capital,
the Wall Street Journal,
the wealthiest state in the union,
right?
Yeah,
going to go under.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what's going on in that state. There's no reason why that can't happen here.
Yeah.
We'll be right back, folks. Hey, welcome back. Good morning. We have Mayor Jon Mitchell here for his very first appearance, and I do appreciate you making time for us, Mayor. We enjoy talking to you. So, I don't know that people really realize this. You're using the term unsustainable. Project it out. If things don't change, what happens?
Yeah, so project out a few years when the national recovery takes a turn down, as it inevitably will, right? And there is, some, dip in state tax receipts and therefore a dip in state aid, right? Whether it's, both unrestricted, we get 3 major pots of money from the state. Chapter 90 money for roads, Chapter 70 money for schools, and unrestricted state aid. There are other smaller programs, but those are the big ones. So if there's a drop in state aid, as there was in 2008, it is going to affect municipal finances directly. Never mind if our own receipts from property taxes drop because of a slowing of the economy. Then there's going to be some really difficult decisions that have to be made. And my job now as the mayor at a time when the city is growing is to make sure that we are fixing our roof while the sun is still shining, and that's why we're talking about healthcare. I look at what's happening in other states, and you mentioned Hartford. So what's really alarming to me about Connecticut is this. The 4 largest cities in Connecticut, Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, and New Haven, are all cities that are a little bit bigger than us, but not much. And they are all in the most affluent state in the Union, Connecticut. And yet they are all, in varying degree, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy for lots of reasons. Some have to do with municipal mismanagement. Some of it is some bad policy decisions made at the state level over the years. But they are having to confront the fact that the pensions and healthcare this policy at the state level has forced those obligations onto those cities, and it's crowded out a lot of the other stuff that they'd like to be doing, like in the area of schools and fire and police and all these other basic municipal services. Now, if that's happening in the wealthiest state in the Union, then what's going to happen in Massachusetts? Now, in Massachusetts, we do benefit from having Boston, right? So Boston, there is no Boston in New York and Connecticut. New York's there, New York suburbs there, but because Boston is, like a lot of other major metros right now, experiencing a golden age, right? There's huge growth. We benefit from that across the state, but that not so much so that it allows us, every other city outside of the Boston area, to sustain themselves. So if you look at, there are cities, and I won't go on record on the air as saying which ones I predict, but there are some that, when the economy turns down, will go over the waterfall. They will follow the likes of Hartford and other places that will be jarred by a drop in state aid and property tax receipts, and they will be looking at closing things like schools and firehouses and all that stuff. Not good. Not good. And so we're doing everything we can to be smart about it, by being more efficient in city government, by reducing things where we can, by investing wisely, and just getting into good management practices. It's a lot of work. We're doing okay, but if we make the right decisions now, we will avoid a bigger problem down the line.
And one of the things that people, I don't know if they realize, but one of the reasons GE left Connecticut is because the state was, General Electric I'm talking about, was so the precarious situation in the state, they started looking, and that's one of the reasons they came to Massachusetts.
Well, Aetna Insurance in Hartford is another one that I think they left for Manhattan, if I remember correctly, but or at least we're talking about. I can't remember how that sorted itself out, but Connecticut's in a bad way, but woe unto us if we think that those problems don't apply, don't affect us here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It's a well, tell us this. What is the of course, we have the fishing industry, which is the big thing. What's going on now, or any new information on Carlos's situation in those permits? I know you guys were working very hard. In fact, for a period of time, it felt like you were the only guy out there working on this thing. That may not be accurate completely, but it seemed like to most of us, it was Jon Mitchell and this, leading this thing, and we were all wondering, where's the federal delegation on this?
Yeah, well, I think so. Right now, there are a few things happening. One is that there is a there's work being done by Sector 9, the governing board of Sector 9, which is, just to remind people, the groundfish industry now is governed in part by sectors of boats that come together and use their quota allocations together as they in order to make money, but also to manage their affairs. So Sector 9 was the one that was comprised mostly of Carlos Rafael's boats, and was the one that was closed by NOAA.
Right.
And so they're trying to get that back up and running. My argument to NOAA has been, well, hurry up,
Right.
and to the guys at Sector 9, hurry up, tell them, give them some confidence that it's going to be run the right way,
Right.
because that's, look, the government holds the cards, and and it sort of behooves them to make sure that they are falling in line as well. So I've tried to facilitate that discussion as best I can. I'll continue to do that, because there are lots of folks on our waterfront who are, who are hurting as a result of that government decision. I was disappointed. I'll just note this. There have been some media reports that suggest that the Port of New Bedford has taken it on the chin by virtue of the closing of Sector 9. The New York Times piece on Sunday,
Right.
the Netflix piece, both of them were woefully misleading. So Carlos's groundfish landings make up about 5% of the total landings in the port.
Right.
There's been a 67% increase in the last 3 years in out-of-state boats landing in the Port of New Bedford.
Really?
There were more North Carolina scallopers that land in New Bedford than land in North Carolina. It is so the port is very successful. It's becoming more and more dominated by scalloping, of course,
Right.
but and we have to make sure that the groundfish industry sustains itself. But people need to understand that the success of that port, the port, it drives our regional economy, and is really it will remain the backbone of our economy if we continue to invest in infrastructure and support the industry when it comes to regulatory decisions at the federal level.
We're gonna come back. I want to touch on wind with you. We'll just take a quick break.
Yep.
Hey, welcome back. We're here live on WBSM with New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell, and we are streaming live on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, you just can watch us. You just watch us. Well, you actually have to click subscribe if you go there as well. There's a blue button. Right. Click subscribe. So, Mr. Mayor, with the big thing going on, or a portion of it anyways, with renewable energies, the wind industry.
Yep.
You've been very actively involved in that.
Right.
What can you tell us?
Yeah, it's an exciting time. We've been spending years of effort to position ourselves to become a center for the offshore wind industry on the East Coast, and that's been years of advocacy, years of working to build better infrastructure in the port, spreading the word in the community to build a political consensus around offshore wind, doing trade missions to Europe, all that stuff, and we're at a point now where. In April, there is scheduled to be an announcement by the State Department of Public Utilities, State Division of Public Utilities, about the first offshore wind procurement of offshore wind energy in the state under the Energy Diversity Act of last year, 2016. The utilities in the state are required to procure 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind generated electricity between then the act and the time the act was passed and the year 2027.
And what does that mean in terms of, if people don't understand it, like maybe the guy on the side of the
microphone,
how many houses? How many houses would that be? How much?
I forget roughly. It's over 1 million.
So it's a lot of power, though.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So it's a lot of power. And so these windmills are going to be built, and a lot of it's going to be staged right out of New Bedford. Now, in the years ahead, the question is going to be, how this is all going to affect the fishing industry. And I think we had a hearing this week in the city, hosted by the state, that I think didn't go very well. The folks in some state agencies are not familiar with the fishing industry and they need to do a better job, a much better job letting the fishing industry know what the implications are, and they have to be better listeners to the very legitimate issues that the fishing industry is raising, so that this stuff is done the right way. But you're going to see a lot of activity in New Bedford, and it's going to be good. You're not going to see windmills in place for a few years still, probably not for another 4 years. But there's definitely going to be a lot more buildup of activity over the next few years that everybody will be able to see.
That's excellent. When people think about fishing, they think about New Bedford, but the fishing industry of New Bedford is a huge percentage, a bigger percentage I think a lot of people realize of the state economy.
We did a study a year and a half ago that showed that 2% of the state's GDP came out of the port of New Bedford. Yeah,
it's an incredible amount of money. 2% for Massachusetts, with the economy of Massachusetts.
Big economy.
Yeah. So, folks, we're coming to the end of the hour. It was once again one of the fastest hours in radio. But I do appreciate you.
Lots to talk about, Chris.
Yeah, and I appreciate you making time for us, Mr. Mayor. And folks, I know sometimes you like to call in. You can always do that with Barry. He's here every Wednesday with Barry. What's nice, it's just good if we can just go back and forth.
That was good.
Hey, folks, we're going to take a quick break, hear the news with Taylor, and we'll have the national news and the weather. I think we've got some weather coming. And then I'll be back for the next hour, and we'll have Fairhaven's own John Holland in here, who used to be the selectman. We're going to kick some issues around as well.